Welcome back to the YSDS Life Science Podcasts. I'm your host, John Coleman. Today, we are discussing a topic which is about collaboration between all the stakeholders within the supply chain. And with me today, as usual, we have a guest, Jim Lund, who is the CDBO at CCRM Nordic. Jim, welcome to the YSDS podcast.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
You work at CCRM and you have a big role there. Can you please start by just telling us more about yourself and your experiences within the industry and what led to the position you have today at CCRM?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a background doing a PhD in medical science at the University of Tromsø. After that, I joined what was then called SP, the Technical Research Institute of Sweden, now called RISE, where we started to look into the challenges ATMP developers were facing back then. It was a Vinnova-backed project. I think it started in 2015, where we came in contact with a lot of these developers that were obviously struggling due to the very challenging ecosystem that we had, I think, at that time, and it's still a lot of these challenges, persist. Complicated, regulatory framework, the lack of capital, also a lot of unproven technologies, and the amount of knowledge about this kind of development wasn't so big back then, and following that we started to work with a national center called CAMP, the Center for Advanced Medicinal Products, where you guys were involved as well, which was, I think, the start of the national collaborations within this area. And I think that has been, a key success here in Sweden to create a, very natural collaboration between the most important stakeholders. So academic researchers, industry, healthcare, but also more gradual, I would say, patients. That is obviously... patient engagement is very important, I think, within this area and in life sciences in general.
Every year, the industry loses an estimated $35 billion due to shipment failures. I mean, that's a huge number. And we see, for CCRM, you mentioned, the collaboration between stakeholders, and we see you as a key player enabling these clinical and commercial supply chains globally. Speaking about your experiences and what you see where things go wrong, do you have any live or real case examples where you see these things happening and recurring and things that we can improve together?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think, so the challenge with ATMPs is that it challenges the whole system, because this is living drugs. And many times this starts as a research, project somewhere. We have, here in the Stockholm region, you have the Karolinska Institute, which is very, active in this area and has excellent research. But they don't think about, they think about research and developing, their ideas into something that can be, produced into a nice paper after a clinical trial, locally. But they don't think about scalability and creating this into a product, which actually is a very different journey. And if you want to scale things, then you actually have to think about already from the very early onset. Again, you cannot sell, you have to, if you want to ship them, for extended distances, you have to cryopreserve them. And then you have to develop, the protocols and methodology to do that. And the ATMP landscape and the regulatory landscape is very risk-based. So it's up to the developers to convince the authorities that the procedures they have in their manufacturing protocols, but also shipment protocols, is not a risk for the patient. And that it's not always so straightforward, since cells are living. So you cannot easily implement, for instance, a potency assay at a destination where you ship the cells, because obviously that would have to be under the quality system of the developer and so on. So there's a lot of considerations that is very important to take from the very early steps of development for ATMPs. And I mean, just the whole this starts already, because for the autologous products, the starting material actually comes from the hospital, which is totally new for the pharmaceutical developers even to think about, that all of a sudden the hospital is part of the manufacturing value chain, really. And they have their systems. So yes, it's very important considerations to take.
Very interesting. Do you believe the guidelines from good distribution practice back in 2013? I remember we discussed that a lot in the ATMP in the CAMP project there. Do you think there will be a lot of changes to those guidelines for distribution now that you mentioned the decentralized trials, etc., or do you think that they will remain as is?
I think that's a very good and interesting question. I mean, so first of all, I mean European Commission is now actually discussing the last I guess details for the updated pharmaceutical legislation. So I think that has to come out first to set more the regulatory landscape, and if that means that they will also focus on GDP. I think that obviously, reworking European regulations takes a very long time and a lot of resources. And I don't think they want to do it if they feel that it's not necessary. So, but then again, I think if there are any, issues that we see, I think then that would probably, actually force them to invest in rethinking, how to solve these challenges.
When you when I listen to your answer there and your predictions of how this will be done, and if there will be new guidelines going forward, I get a bit worried again, because we always try to place logistics at an earlier phase, in the planning phase, when the clients discuss clinical trials, and we want to be part of that planning, not seen as an afterthought when everything is, now it's ready to ship, we're going to start this project, now we're going to start moving around these sensitive products around the world. We want to be included earlier. So when you say then that there might be new guidelines, we want to be part of that planning, not being a silo outside. We want to be part of the development in the whole ecosystem. Do you see that logistics and companies such as ourselves, that it could be an opportunity and to mitigate these risks if we are invited at an earlier stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would bring a lot of value. But I think many of the service provider has this challenge that they come in. Their competence should actually come in a lot earlier. But at that stage, the project is still very mature and hasn't the funding really to take the steps maybe that they even need to do sometimes. So I think this is one of the challenges we have here in Europe and the European ecosystem, where there's not enough venture capital really to do proper product development here at this stage. And this is something I think we need to work at the European level to make sure that we actually solve, so that you can take have the right competences and take the right considerations more early.
Mm. You mentioned collaboration there again with we were supposed to do this recording this episode yesterday, but you were busy doing other things. You were in Brussels, and you were there to discuss and see the new Biotech Act that is about to be released. What's the thing about that? What's going to happen?
Yes, I think it's very interesting times now in Europe. I think the union has seen that due to the global kind of geopolitical situation, we actually need to collaborate much closer. And another thing that was released was this big Draghi report looking at European competitiveness, where the Mario Draghi basically says, that there's a lot of opportunity here that is going lost actually, and comparing to APAC and the US, Europe is actually decreasing its competitiveness. And then as a result of that, the Commission is now working on something they call the Biotech Act, which is basically, a plan to get, Europe back on track again. And I think that's going to be a very important document. As I think a lot of these documents, it will probably take, they say it might come late this year, but I think it's more likely it will come next year. But that will basically lay the strategy for Europe to be more competitive here, and focusing on creating an ecosystem where companies can actually scale and grow. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that is implemented. And obviously access to capital is one of the big challenges they're focusing on, because even the Draghi report states that Europe only has 20% of the venture capital compared to what the US have.
Okay. When do you believe this Biotech Act will be released?
Yeah, I guess maybe in a year. Yeah, that's what I think. But we'll see. But it was a very I think nice and productive meeting. So we met with some of the members of parliament there to discuss ATMP in specifically. So this was done together with ARM, the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, which is a global kind of stakeholder organization that work with advocacy for cell and gene therapy. So I think it was a very positive and productive meeting, and I think this is also interesting. Looking back, 10 years ago, we didn't see a lot of politicians, neither here in Sweden nor the EU, that actually understood what cell and gene therapies actually are.
But now they do.
Yes, that's very clear.
That's good. So, I mentioned that we want to be part of the planning stage and everything. So there's different tools that we can use as a logistics provider to ensure that we have the most positive outcome in the end of a project or even a shipment. One of these tools is that we want to make sure that we do a real needs analysis to see what this specific client with this specific product going to that specific destination, what should be included for that specific case. So we find also the pharmaceuticals being more and more personalized. And we then truly believe that we need to be even more niched and to be able to meet that specific need for that specific client. So we see here an opportunity to perhaps sign quality agreements with clients to assure that, for example, that we see the responsibility table of who is responsible to do what, not only when everything is going perfectly, but also when things are going south, who is responsible to act on perhaps a deviating temperature excursion, for example. But exactly when then should the collaboration start with the logistics provider?
To be honest, I think the earlier the better. When you start to work, many start to focus on the IMPD documentation, but I think it might actually be very good for a developer to start with doing, a target product profile. So how would this product actually look when it's launched into the markets? Because that will tell you a lot. For instance, do you need to cryopreserve this product? If the answer is yes, then you know that, okay, then at least you can ship it. There's a big, obviously, push for having some kind of, off-the-shelf solution, because that will obviously increase, the efficiency in the overall manufacturing, workflows and systems. But right now, when you have, one batch is one dose for, one patient, it's very different. And as you say, it's very high value, products that has to be handled with care. So then I would say, before you would go into your first in man would be the right time to talk with, people with logistic expertise.
As soon as possible. Because that's also I think, misunderstanding. Consultation from a logistics provider doesn't cost anything. I mean, we don't charge the clients to get consulted in how they should think about the project that's upcoming for the next year or so. It's when actually the clients start moving the shipments, they get charged. So I totally agree there. It's like this: the sooner the better, and you don't know what you don't know. I mean, if you don't ask, you're not going to find out the potential risks involved in the project and logistics. So yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you have so many years experience with the industry. You've seen so many things that could be improved. You speak with a lot of stakeholders, different subsegments, and now especially at the CCRM. If you could fix one thing, you have one thing that you could fix in the whole supply chain within the industry, and then preferably if you can connect that to logistics. It's not a must, but if you could, what would that be?
So it's a bit of a boring, answer here, I think.
It's okay.
But I think, again, access to capital, because the challenge we have here, because the companies doesn't have access to capital, I mean, that spills down then, on the service providers and other organizations in the ecosystem. So I think that's a big challenge in the European ecosystem, and also which we see, looking at the ATMPs that is now sold to European patients. The majority of those is coming from companies with a headquarters outside the EU. So I think, you can always discuss, what's the hen and what's the egg. But I think, access to capital for developers to really, afford doing things, more properly from the outset. Because we know that we have excellent research in European universities. So there should be a high potential for value creation. And I think there's a lot of examples on this. There was a report from the European Patent Organization looking at specifically oncology, stating that if you look at the number of patents in between Europe and US, so it's about the same number. But when you looked at how many of those patents actually turned into companies that were able to scale, I think it was 30 or 40% compared to EU. So I think that would be the one of the big obstacles that we would need to do. And in the end of the day, we have a lot of public funded research here too. So it makes sense, if you start to invest in that and create this ecosystem, then you would also, due to the complexity of these products, have more local manufacturing here in the EU. You would have benefits from service providers and from people who produce reagents and components, bioreactors. So I think there's we could really be leading within this area and really create this as a strategic industry for the future.
So, do you have anything you want to share with your experiences as recommendations to peers within the industry? Things to think about, or don't go into the same, don't do the same mistakes perhaps as you've seen others done previously, or any tips or tricks?
Yeah, I think one thing that we see and have seen is there's a big focus to rush into your first in man trials to get to this value inflection point. But the thing is, if you haven't really done your homework in terms of regulatory strategy, logistical strategy, and process development and manufacturing strategy, how can you get this product out to thousands of patients worldwide and in Europe? It might actually be that some of the value, or maybe all the value in your product or concept, might actually fail to reach its potential, because you have to redo things after your first in man. you have to start over from scratch, basically. And I think that's a very important consideration to think about. What is the long-term goal here of this development? So that would be, my suggestion, to carefully consider, how this can be scaled to reach, the patients it needs to do to become, a sustainable product in the market.
Good. Jim, thanks a lot for your insights and your knowledge sharing. Hope to see you again in the future with another podcast from YSDS.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
You have been listening to YSDS Life Science Podcasts, a 3-part series where we have highlighted and explored the challenges within cold chain logistics. If you found one of these topics interesting or need support with your upcoming shipments, please do not hesitate reaching out to us at YSDS or follow us on LinkedIn.